Hi, this is Stephen with Fairs Management Interactive, better known as Fairs MI, and here's the second video in our series of tips for Fairs MI users who already have some experience. I'm going to show you tips on measuring and spacing, getting ahead right from the start with your Fair Midway layouts, and how to generate separate inventory spreadsheets for each of your fair setup categories. Okay, well, measuring. We have a measure distance tool that is really designed for measuring areas and buildings before we start adding objects. The tool is here at the top on the end. Drag each arrow to what you want to measure and then just mouse over the measuring tool to get the distance. But when we already have some objects on our layout, this tool often gets confused about what to measure from. So we have an alternative that works just about as well and in a lot of cases much better. If you drop in what we call a minimum pod, that's one booth in a row and one row, we can drag one of the booths with one side of the booth at the measuring starting point and manually drag it to the end measure point. Then all we have to do is look over at our booth control tool and see what the measurement is. Now you can rotate the booth and stretch it to measure at an angle, but there's a better way that's especially useful when you have a requirement of separation, usually from the fire marshal, and you need to position an object to be in compliance. You can do this by sizing a temporary measuring booth to the required separation distance in each direction of the square, and then convert it to a circle with your icon object tool. That spacing tool will show you how much to adjust the separation between the two objects that you're trying to meet into compliance. By the way, I always name my spacing tool with an X, so I know to either delete it or hide it from the actual planning map. One of the methods I teach beginners for starting an outdoor layout is making that minimum pod I keep talking about, just 2 booths to start, and then just keep making copies with the size and number added and possibly replacing it with an object icon. But if you have a lot of vendor trailers or vendor space and you know what the average size is, we can get way ahead of the layout and numbering by making a larger pod first. If you look at the pod setup I'm doing here, you'll see I'm creating a single horizontal row of booths sized to what I'm allowing for each vendor space, or what I estimate the predominant size of the vendor booths will be. And I'll resize those booths that vary from the preset size later. Take a look at the pod control tool's orientation settings with its various options. I've set it for a continuous numbering system. So I place the pod by using that 4 square tool icon over where I want the row of vendor booths to go. So now I've got my row of concession stands that are all done and in a row. The bottom row I'll use for the other types of setups or any other vendor booths. I'm going to pause to show you another tip. You can ungroup all the booths in a pod, and sometimes this makes it much easier to grab and work with the objects. Just right-click the pod and look for Ungroup in the list of commands. You can always regroup your own selections later, and I'll show you that and why in a second. Now I can use the leftover side of the row of booths to start a general placement of objects and just get an idea of the attendee traffic lanes I want to develop. I can resize, label, and convert to an icon each booth as I need to. And now I'm going to grab several booths from the leftover row to create a curved row of booths in the lower right hand corner. But watch, I'm going to grab those booths, right click them, and group them together and make it easier to move them down to that corner. I zoom in and I move a single booth and then just do a rough rotation manually with the little blue rotation handle that's beside each booth. As I get that curve to take shape, I can fine-tune rotations with either the booth control tool, or I can, after starting a rotation manually, hold down the shift key and rotate in very small fractions of degrees. You'll notice I don't renumber booths or objects as I go. I prefer to complete a majority of the layout and then number the booths with a logical flow sequence. Once I get some booths spread out on the layout, I'll start editing those booths to their proper size and begin converting them to icon objects from my list. While I'm converting some of these objects to a ride and a food tent, understand that right now everything except your background map is on the same layer. And the important takeaway here is that your inventory spreadsheet will include everything that's on an active layer. And right now we just have one layer. So if I don't want rides or tents on my exhibitor list, I need to put them on another layer. I'm going to click on the layer tool at the end of the upper right hand row of tools, and I'm going to make some more layers to move those objects off of the vendor booth layer and onto a layer dedicated to their own category. If I click the plus sign on the layer control, I can make a new layer, and by double clicking the layer name I can rename it appropriately. By clicking on a layer, when it turns blue, that is the active layer, and that's the one that will generate your exhibitor list when you go to create one. Just by clicking a different layer will generate a different set of inventory. On that layer control, there's also a move button, and once you've clicked on a single or a group of objects, you can move them to the proper layer by clicking that button and then checking the layer that you want them to go to. Well, that's it for this set of tips. Please don't hesitate to contact us with questions or requests. Thanks so much from Fairs Management Interactive, better known as Fairs MI.